bit about what do you think the current situation is with some of the regulatory issues, with the SEC being somewhat protective of the banks and not allowing Coinbase, BlockFi, Celsius, and other lenders to actually offer lending. And next thing is savings, right? What do you guys think about?
It's a really bad joke. This shouldn't happen. Right. After all, if the government is in the position to print money and controls money, then by de facto this makes money a public good, and they are not acting in the way that you would act if they were treated as a public good, which is you would make it more available, you would make it easier to use, and they're actively hampering innovation right now by what they're doing. It's absolutely absurd. And specifically, what Gensler is saying and or not saying is stifling innovation in this country. And I think people don't actually at scale understand that the whole CBDC discussion is actually just kind of a Muppet show at this point in time, right? And it's very unfortunate because you cannot uninvent technologies. So digital bearer instruments will continue to be a thing. And if when where we actually have one that's US dollar denominated, this could actually go a long way to spread freedom in the world. But I don't think that the government, I never actually like to talk about the government in these terms as to personify it. It's specific individuals with specific interest that have a specific agenda that's fueled by other people, right? And that's very, very obvious. And I think at large as a community, we need to clarify this particular communication and not fall into these traps to where we're trying to explain things, but do the same things that politicians do, where they just kind of form certain narratives and just repeat the narrative. And that's what we need to do. We need to ensure that people understand that cryptographic based currencies, digital bearer instruments, are a freedom instrument, right? And that fiat currencies are de facto a way of suppressing freedom and citizens within a country. Stopping my sermon here.
Go
Yeah, I
ahead,
think
Danny.
my perspective on it is somewhat contrarian but understanding. So on one side, um, I understand why the government's doing this and where they're coming from. Like a lot of the regulations that we have go back to the 1930s,
The
and that's not to
government is
say
not
that.
doing it, Daniel, right? It's specific people. You shouldn't say the
Yeah, exactly.
government, right?
That's
It's very
that,
specific people doing it.
that's actually the part that I definitely agree with you. There are definitely some big personalities that are driving agendas that slowed down progress that had been happening at the regulators. Um, I've always been very clear that even though the regulations go back to the 1930s, which is the excuse that a lot of people say that that's why regulation needs to change, that same 1930s regulations and then the Banking Act that came afterwards and all that uh, actually has been able to survive a lot of technological changes through the years. So really, when there's a new disruptive technology, the issue is figuring out how does this apply to the new technology, not how to modify the regulation to adapt to the new technology. There's like definitely a few things that need to be tweaked here and there, but it's not like a whole new framework is needed. The issue right now, I agree with Christian, is the fact that there's some personalities driving the agenda, not only at the regulators but also even within Congress. What the infrastructure bill did was enraging because it actually just showed a lack of understanding, um, but almost to like a to the point of like negligent misunderstanding.
Yes. No, it's
That
gross.
aside,
It's gross
yeah,
negligent. Yes, they're talking about things that they fundamentally either don't understand, do not want to understand, or simply take on someone else's mantle and fight. Right.
yeah, essentially they take the point of view like, oh, these guys in crypto are doing a lot of money, so tax them. It just doesn't work that way. It's a dumb, lazy approach. On the other hand, with the whole talk about like stable coins specifically, I actually just last night I had dinner with somebody at the Fed that helps like craft the position inside of the Fed with respect to these things, and she was actually like having very good questions, trying to understand the different business models of stablecoins and just the different dynamics of the participants, because their main concern is that right now they cannot wrap their head around of what would be the systematic risk to the economy if suddenly a bunch of these stablecoins with dubious collateral like cause a run on the bank, where the bank in this case are the stablecoin issuers. So right now they're just trying to figure out how to assess that risk to see how much they need to rein in or actually allow these stable coins to work. So actually what I was trying last night was kind of like to explain how the system works so they can have a better picture to be able to assess that risk. But that's their main thing. They're just trying to figure out how much harm could be done in a scenario where things go sideways. So we're not talking about the everyday people having tether. That's fine. The problem is what happens when suddenly tether is worth 50 cents on the dollar, and how much you're gonna have out there, and what's gonna get just like unwound, and what's the effect on the economy. There's just no right now they don't have a proper framework or sense on how to assess that risk, and that's why they are being extremely cautious on it. And I
Yeah.
actually can understand that. I understand why they're concerned, and I appreciate the fact that they're trying to be very diligent in understanding that risk. The lending thing related to Coinbase and other stuff, that's a whole different story. And on that side, I mean, the law did change recently to allow some of these institutions to do a few more things that previously only banks could do. So there was definitely like some advancement there, and then this is kind of like kneecapping it again. So it's a push and pull, and it's a little annoying, mainly because going back to Christian's point, I think there are internal interests just holding back progress that was already in motion.
Well, yeah, I agree with you, Daniel, and I also agree with one thing that Christian said in particular, which is the idea that we have to come up with a simplified message and keep banging on it, right? Because one of the challenges that we face is there's a pretty significant percentage of the population that doesn't understand blockchain or cryptocurrency and fears what they don't understand, and there's a motion towards greater taxation in our country right now. So for a politician, going after blockchain is low hanging fruit, right? There's very little political risk for them right now to go after that space because a large percentage of their constituents don't understand why they should care about it.
Excellent. Let's just introduce Adrian and Anne. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, great to be here. Sorry we were tardy. We were in a songwriting room. It just gets so crazy here on Clubhouse. Like everything you could ever imagine is all in one place. And but this is my favorite room because we are all about creating unicorns. Because when we create unicorns, we change the world for the better without having to ask permission.
Oh, we lost you, Adrian.
Oh, I was done. Hi, I'm Adrian. I am an NFT OG. I've been in Bitcoin since 2009, where this was pre-wallet, where I promptly lost 2,500 Bitcoin. It's somewhere. I should say it's not lost. It's misplaced. Probably gone forever. Anyway, I do NFT projects for celebrities. I am working on a DeFi DAO to fund research projects and litigation finance. And I have a naughty dating app for good girls that gets women laid because we need safety, security, and certainty to say yes, even to dinner. And what else? A big NFT drop for Crypto Vixens, my nonprofit that inspires women to join founding teams as advisors or co founders, regardless of technical expertise. So I am in my happy place here. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Anne?
Hey everyone, I go by Anonymous, which is really a combination of the things I care about. I'm an autonomous neural network plus to name, which is the opposite of being anonymous. But I'm a serial entrepreneur in the entertainment technology world. I've been in the space for 30 years and the decentralized space for nearly that long. And So I'm really interested in applications and content that push the envelope. And so the company I've been working on for quite a long time, it's called Scene doing business as entertainment AI. And it's a company I set out to do what I actually coined the term social video for, and also proof of participation. But this was before Satoshi, and we were I described the system working with a smart script which automated an end-to-end system and used the story as the machine code, and got everyone paid using what I called microcash. So I was a bit early with that, and now I'm leaning into it hard with what's happening with NFTs. I came out of the closet, so to speak, with around blockchain in 2015 when I gave a talk at South by Southwest called Writers Blockchain Full Stack Storytelling. And a lot, I don't care what you call it, if you call it an NFT or something else, this is about really the micronization of data, the automation of services, and the transactional web. I don't like to call it Web 3.0 because I think good, bad, or ugly. This is about everything becoming transactionalized, and there's some scary things there with top-down internet proposals, for instance, but there's also some really exciting things we can do by having more and more direct to customer kinds of paradigms. And I would say everyone should think about it in terms of direct to and from a customer, or the group we formerly used to call the audience.
So Anne and I have been in digital media for a very long time. You know what's so interesting about the discussion we're having today about the regulatory, difficulties we're having right now with some of the lending protocols, etc. If you go back to something like a Napster, which we lived through, probably all of us on this call, and the incumbents got together and they were able to put them out of business. And I was kind of competing with those guys when they started, Juiced and everything else later. But then Kazaa came around, and it was even more challenging to compete with Kazaa and put it out of business and other services. And so streaming is now prevalent. Do you foresee that happening in the blockchain space anytime soon, or in near term?
Uh, can you be? I missed the point. Are you
Well,
saying that we're going to have a standard in blockchain?
Well, yeah, because if you look at the SEC right now, they're very protective of, banking type things, with stable coins and with the lending protocols, being sort of at the top of their targeted agenda. This is kind of what incumbents here are banks, incumbents then were studios. Incumbents are always trying to protect their own business models and, kind of turf, and the regulatory bodies are siding with them at the beginning. But there has to be a period where the Kazakh comes around. Maybe it's all the DeFi that's out there, and then there's kind of no turning back. Are we close to that period?
I think
Well, we're
the
probably not close to it, but ultimately that's what's going to happen. I think it's very similar to what happened when we introduced voice over IP protocols, or the next generation voice over IP protocols, because the first ones weren't really good. If you remember that, we started out with H323, which was basically half duplex at the time, kind of Roger that clearance mode. But then ultimately, once we had SIP, the new stand for voice over IP, adoption happened really rapidly, but adoption happened by the form of actually having useful client software. And right now, we don't have a lot of useful client software, and the on-ramps are really, really hard. But ultimately, if you look throughout history, I think Mexico for almost a decade, I think, they made voice over IP illegal. But people who didn't want to be metered by the minute by the local phone company just found a way, obviously, to still use Skype or other software clients to use voice over IP to make free phone calls, because the pain otherwise was too great. It was the option between not calling mom or calling mom because you didn't have the money. So, in a similar fashion, whenever the pain is great enough, and for whoever the pain is great enough, i.e., I lose a lot of my funds when I try to send it back home, for remittance purposes, something else, I'll find a way around, even if the local government is trying to make this really, really difficult. But ultimately, this technology can't be uninvented. And ultimately, this is kind of quixotic to trying to hinder it. And again, it's very annoying because it's simply technology, and regulators always put it in a way that they're trying to say that they are regulating the technology, which they don't. They regulate the behavior of people under their control. And that's the main thing that always should be rephrased. Whenever someone's saying that and he's sitting next to me on a panel or something, I tell him right away, interrupt him. It's like, you're not, this is semantically dishonest. You're being intellectually dishonest. Just phrase it in a way that is actually legally correct and say, hey, you want to limit the behavior of people within your jurisdiction and see how many people will support you in that particular mission. Because generally, I think people want to be free and don't want to be told what to do. And generally, people are not trying to use this particular technology to do nefarious things. That's just utter nonsense, right? It's a really bad tool to do nefarious things, obviously.
Yeah, I think that's actually like a great point that essentially the behavior is what it can be regulated. But then the problem with that is that then the regulators have the power to hold back the large financial institutions and any like registered crypto fund uh, to prevent them from engaging in the activities that they deem to be not allowed. So whether that's lending without a banking license, like in the case of like DeFi products, you cannot stop the technology, that's for sure, but you can certainly slap on the wrist or shut down agents that are playing those roles publicly. So essentially, what happens is that the technology is going to continue to grow at the retail level because that's unstoppable, and also, of course, overseas. But the challenge here is that, um, at least generally, people feel that the technology is going to mature once it's adopted by institutions. But that is exactly what the regulators are hindering right now. Whether that's for better or for worse, it seems definitely it's going to hurt innovation, but it will affect the growth at the institutional level. There will still be significant growth at the retail level because that's unstoppable. But the institutions are definitely going to be held back.
Yeah, but who's ultimately harmed is the consumer, right? Because,
Yeah,
and
completely agree.
yeah, and mostly those who can least afford it, right? If you have any kind of wealth, well, you find ways around it by setting up certain legal structures, right? But if you're just a retail consumer who wants to use it simply to save a few pennies or whatever it is, a couple of dollars, right? There is no reason at this point in time in technology to have a checking account at a bank. That's absurd. That's
Yeah,
it's the same thing as still using a rotary phone at this point in time, because your funds are sitting there at the disposal of that commercial entity who can extract wealth out of this. Why you could offer this right now in a peer-to-peer safe lending version, right? So I actually don't see critical bugs at this point in time, not with a company like Coinbase or someone else. Right? They are more secure than any retail bank by a country mile.
yeah. I think what the institutional adoption brings in is actually like ease of use and better interface and better distribution, so more people can access it, and it also gives it some legitimacy. Sometimes when we're like really heads down on blockchain, we feel that essentially everybody should be doing this. But if you go down the rabbit hole on DeFi, it's not a friendly, non-techie world. It's actually like it's not easy to set up DeFi wallets and all these things, especially if you're never even on blockchain. So the only way of having like the broad population adopting this and not just the techies and the blockchain like die-hard fans is by actually having institutions that abstract away all that complication, all that complexity, so that people can simply enjoy the product without having to lose a bunch of money or headaches simply because the interface itself, the usability, it's absolutely horrible.
Yeah, but that's a question of developers applying better UX and UI mostly. That has nothing to do with institutions, right?
I mean, this is
Well,
really about different ways of looking at the world, right? So I've long said that NFTs are being used to market programmable money to the wider population, and that means essentially blockchain versus central bank currencies. And if you really look at it, where the real issue is, the protocols, and do we even have an internet anymore? Is this really going to be a top-down IP change, as like what's being promoted right now at the ITU?
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then, it doesn't really matter what you call it. We're all going to be, tracked ad infinitum. We have no privacy, and our transactions, including our communications, will be quantified in a way which I think is going to be quite frightening.
Well, I need to correct something. So there's a constant conflation between protocols and blockchains. So blockchains are not protocols in the narrow technical sense. They're protocols in the business logic sense,
I
right? So that
understand
that
that.
yeah, so that's why you use blockchains only to build digital vending machines, which are their applications, right?
Right, but I mean, for instance, I was at the e-currency company maybe 3 years ago when I spoke for the IMF up in Napa, and this company had mapped every country, almost every country's digital fiat to a protocol that
Mhm.
that they were, going to roll out. The company didn't even have a name on the door. I was there because of digital identity things that we were meeting with their digital identity person. And, this is what I'm talking about is the ITU is, for those who don't know, is the International Telecommunications Union, which is part of the UN, but is much older than the UN. And what was seeing was that Huawei was promoting this new IP, or a new internet protocol, which is essentially a top-down model. And those are the tensions, bottom down. I mean, the internet itself is a decentralized structure, and everybody's efforts to kind of get out ahead of it and re-centralize things, I think, is really, this ongoing sort of organic thing where people are pushing their own the place that they benefit the most. So, I think that's part of the educational process. I think, of course, we're going to get easier onboarding, better security, and that's really the most important issue, right? Is like, even someone like me who would be considered a crypto OG, I unplugged everything a few years ago when I got hacked really badly. And it's not just the blockchain world where this is happening. In the analog world, I also had, personal identity theft, corporate identity theft, and then, of course, SIM swaps, et cetera. And until that stuff, I mean, I think regulators do have a place to play there because, you know, even if you're very, very skilled, and my husband works in cybersecurity, you're really vulnerable, especially if you have any visibility.
Yeah, that's super interesting that you bring up the ITU because most people don't understand this. So I wrote some of the deregulation papers for the European telecommunication market. So I know a few things about regulation of telecommunication, which is to me way more important than banking regulation. But actually, there's an interesting project that we're trying to get off the ground right now, where we have the rights to an international number realm, and that's the only one outside of the Sirius system that's not assigned to a country.
What is it? What
And
is that? An international number realm? I don't know what.
yes, or like a country code,
Okay, got it.
it's the equivalent of a country code, but it's not assigned to a country. So it's assigned to an entity. So Sirius is the only other entity that has one. So our objective is to make that an endpoint for payments.
Wow, that's super interesting.
Yes, exactly. And I think you probably understand the significance of this, and most people won't. And actually, the people that had the right to it didn't understand it when they pitched it to me because they wanted to use it as an identifier, which I talked them out of.
Wow. Okay, I need to go down this rabbit hole, but I won't do it on the stage. But you know,
Yeah, sure.
I became a privacy advocate in 1994 when my friend Fred Davis said to me, the day I met him, actually, the most interesting idea I'd ever heard before or since, which is that in 1994, he said, I think users should be able to copyright their DNA so that they can control what's marketed to them online. So that
Right,
I,
yeah.
so that idea is being, so it is actually being funded. I mean, there are companies trying to do that very thing, but it it blew my mind, and it's why I wouldn't launch Gracenote until we conform to all of the EFF's published best practices. That system is still running today, and it saved our company by my doing that. However, you know, I I just don't see how you get to a system, even if it's encrypted. Frankly, we're going to have quantum level de-encryption, not too long from now. And I just don't know how you solve it. And I've been trying to think about this for more than 2 decades.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said about that. And so you touch on a couple of words that people keep using in that realm, like privacy, and then they talk about GDPR. There's some fundamental perspective that needs to be taken on. So GDPR, for example, has this quaint request of right to be forgotten. Obviously, this utterly naive in the context of digital technologies, right? So the actual right, obviously, that you have as a human being is the right not to be observed. And if and when and where we actually create the evidence tools to show the externalities that these create, and kind of the Cambridge Analytica example was just a high point. This is happening every single second of every single day, everywhere around the world. But my point here is we've been looking at all these solutions that use these unfortunate metaphors of things like digital identity, which is obviously just a very useless metaphor, right? Identity requires consciousness. It's a whole different discipline that's generally referred to as transhumanism. But the larger point there is what people are referring to as profiles. And profiles is an externality of you having an online persona, but the persona is the part of data that you control. The profile is the data that the platform provider attaches, and so forth. Larger point here being is we have a lot of externalities that are happening every single day, and I have been asking developers to build evidence tools for these externalities. And I always make this somewhat obscure example. There's probably a child right now somewhere on the planet drinking bleach because of information that he or she found on the World Wide Web. So if you can actually create attribution to how this particular individual was influenced to do this action, then you can start holding people accountable, right? And we are not doing this.
Yeah, but I mean, people have been trying to use blockchains to really get at the source of attribution, but
Hmm.
I happen to be an information realist, so I believe people have their own point of view, which they create at all times, and we can go down that rabbit hole. But I think again that is playing more into this idea of control, and also, if you're going to have a surveillance, you know, attribution, not everything is quantifiable, and not everything can be tracked just because somebody actually put it up, into a trackable system. The most powerful people will be those who are completely, as you said, unfindable by a system, right? And that gives a
Right.
tremendous amount of power when everybody else is having to track it, be tracked. But I think that this gets to this whole idea of truth, and I don't know if we want to do that in this conversation. I'm happy to, but the thing about it with for instance, digital lockbox schemas, and how we
Hmm.
are going to have users control their own digital, let's call it self-sovereign digital identity. The problem with the lockbox schema is that it's still sitting on someone's network, and it's the same thing as if you have multiple keys for a safety deposit box. It's still in
Right.
someone's bank in someone's country. you
Yes.
know and just because it's virtualized does not mean that there isn't control there by a.
Yeah, there's a bigger topic here, which is that of the topology of the current network. So right now, the network treats you like an oracle function. So we need to reverse this paradigm. right? So where you are an actual agent again in the system. So that's a common fallacy within our space, that people think everything can be done with blockchain-based solutions. That's obviously not true, right? So
Right.
at the end of the day, we will see cryptographic primitives under owner control only, right? So point here being, you should never create copies, period, full stop. And I'll always I try to explain this in very simple metaphors. If you go back in time before the days of database solutions, the way you would pass an access point, i.e., you would enter another country, is you would hand over your physical passport, and that person would, at the other end, would observe it and compare it with your likeness and hand it back to you. And again, so there were no databases, so I would go home, put my passport in my drawer. So if that's the only technology that was available, well, it would be very hard for you to find my house, break into that particular drawer, steal that from me, and do something nefarious. And so the point of this metaphor is very simple. This is the type of primitive you need to create, so that whenever you create a new, this was an example of a government issued credential, then you need to actually ensure that it has this capacity, because the other part to that, this new issuance also needs to invalidate all the copies that are out there, because the digital landfill doesn't just go away one day, right? So it will always be there. But by virtue of you having this new issued credential, all of the other credentials are invalid. And so the associated metaphor that I typically quote is, it's been 20 years I checked into a hotel in Sao Paulo, and my phone rang, and it was my banker here in Southern California, and she was asking if I was in Brazil. I said yes, and she hung up. And everybody on the call here knows why this phone happened, because some alert popped up on a screen that told her, hey, one of your clients' credit cards is being used in an unusual fashion. You probably should check in. Well, we had this particular thing happen 20 years ago. This should be available to everybody and for all of your data. So I call it kind of the do not call list on your data. And that was actually something we've been discussing yesterday with international privacy advocates for a long time. Anyway, I'm going to rein myself in here.
No, and I agree with you, and I'll just sum it up to say somebody needs to regulate the multi-trillion dollar, data business, and that is really the issue. Because as much as you might even get a fairly, quote unquote, fair system with your government, that doesn't stop all the third parties from
Yeah, I
exploiting
think we
it.
need to make an example out of someone. We need to put someone, i.e., Zuckerberg, in prison for life, right? And
Well, I mean, honestly, people point to Cambridge Analytica, but it was Chris Hughes, who was the co-founder of Facebook, who pioneered all of those techniques with our
sure,
former president, Mr. Obama. And I was writing
yeah,
about this over 10 years ago, and I didn't have any inside information. I could look at they bragged about it, frankly, in all of the
sure.
paper, all of.
That's in the advertising. It was in a presentation. Absolutely, yeah.
Well, interesting discussion. I think clearly the war on data management has to go on for quite some time.
Mariana, let me chime in here for just 1 second. It's important to understand this is not about data, right? So people always harp on the data. So the data is being harvested just for a particular purpose. It's to create profiles, and the profiles are being created to manipulate you. That's the objective. So what we're talking about is human agency. So ultimately, human freedom. That's what we're talking about. Data
Yes.
by itself doesn't have any value. That's why I always disagreed with the statement that data is the new oil. It's not. Right?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's interesting because I was presenting to a bunch of data scientists last Saturday about blockchain. And I remember the first time I spoke to them, there was a room full of just super bright PhDs in data science. And I was talking about decentralized networks, and their eyes were just glazing over because it was just so different than these large, pools and storages of data, and the way to dissect it and get to it and quote unquote analyze it. It's just a fundamentally different approach to data that we're talking about here. So thinking of a little bit more down the lines of what was in the last newsletter, Sky Mavis and its players have generated over 2 billion in sales for Axie Infinity. It's an NFT game, and basically this particular game is used in a variety of third world countries as a mean of, supplementing one's income. Um, how many of these types of games are you guys foreseeing in the marketplace? Is this sort of play to earn, kind of the killer app of NFTs, or is Axie Infinity just going to reign supreme on its own? Okay, I'll answer my own question.
I think I
So,
th- no, the this is a model that can't be stopped. I'm in my opinion. I mean, give you an example. I see a lot of NFT drops out there. They don't know how to actually engage the audience at all. Not it's beyond marketing. They're missing the point. It's kind of the thing I always say when I run into this is GameStop. Like you're going to have a generation of people who absolutely the process itself is the game, and I absolutely think play to earn is a model that makes sense for so many reasons, and not just play to earn, but play to learn. And I think these models will be, transported into educational systems. But you're talking about a sort of what I consider to be a quantum shift between how people interact with knowledge, and I think that's actually incredibly exciting. So yeah, I'm leaning into it.
yeah, it was interesting. The first time I saw it was, I think, in 2018 when Cent, which is CENT, created a kind of like an Instagram killer application on blockchain, and they were actually having people sort of subscribe early on to someone's popularity. So if you heard Taylor's, um, sing back when she was 16, Taylor Swift, and you put some money on her, you predicted that she was going to be wildly successful and popular for the next four albums, that that $10 you put into her popularity would grow to be thousands of dollars. And it was almost like predicting how popular some of these creatives were. This is way before NFTs and cent was the currency used on it. And then he cut a really interesting deal with MetaMask when MetaMask had maybe 2 or 3 million users versus over 10 now. And so I thought that business model made so much sense, but Axie Infinity really took it to a next generation of applications. And even Cent in 2018 was able to provide some of the creatives in third world countries ability to sustain themselves and to actually pursue their art. And now with this rapid expansion in every direction, we're going to see more and more of this. I agree with Anne. What about venture capitalists in terms of play to earn games? A lot of these play to earn games are raising money from the actual public, but Mark Cuban did invest in Sky Mavis, so he has invested in several of the top tier NFT place spaces at the moment. Do you see more VCs coming into this?
I mean, absolutely. They're betting on the next generation of thinkers. I can tell you that my son and his longtime girlfriend, the way that they approach all of this is so different than our generations, and who wouldn't want to bet on that? I mean, it's pretty. I mean, okay, we have regulatory issues that need to be solved. I'm a part of a virtual being DAO. Friends with Benefits just had to create a Delaware C corp in order to be able to function, and that's what kept me out of the ICO market years ago. Was I have a Delaware C corp, and I know, but even talking to the smartest people I could find, the best lawyers I could find in the space, nobody could convince me that I wasn't putting all of my intellectual property at risk in doing so. And I'm glad I didn't now. because I think we're that much closer to be able to make some sober decisions about it. Unfortunately, I think uh, the stuff is going to be based on permission blockchains to begin with, because I think, at least in the US, that's really where I think it's going to have to.
So a lot of, we've been in digital media spaces, you and I, for a couple of decades and more probably. But what we're seeing now really doesn't rival anything before, even, the internet, the broadband, the mobile, all those different spaces we lived through are nothing like what's going on right now. I'm seeing brands entering into the game right now, and they don't really know what to do. Even I would say even less so than some of the companies in the space and some of the NFT drops. I feel the brands are just wildly spending money on whatever they can find. G Fuel, and Robert Rapper and Gamer FN Mecca are giving away NFT energy drinks. I saw a drop in the clubhouse with French Montana sneakers, and you can get, in person sneakers and NFT sneakers at the same time. Where is all this going? Is my question. I think going back to Anne's point,
Yeah,
the traditional marketing is not going to do well in this space.
I think for some companies it's really still a publicity play, and if you look at what it costs them to create and mint those NFTs, it's not an enormous cost, and they're able to get eyeballs out of it. They're able to get PR out of it and be perceived as a more hip and advanced company. And I still think that's what most of these companies are doing. It's still really a PR play.
Uh, Wait, come back to me. Hold on. Well, I mean, I'm going to use an old analogy that I've been saying literally for 30 years, since I did an interactive disc with David Bowie, and we literally put this on the box, or I did. I said, "Don't be a viewer, come be a doer." And later I was quoted in Billboard as saying, people don't want to play their videos they or their audio; they want to play with them, and that's the shift, right? And so as we look at more and more sophisticated models for artificial intelligence, and even if you look at one of my favorite thinkers in the space, uh, who was a Turing Award-winning AI professor or is at UCLA, he wrote a book called The Book of Why, The New Science of Cause and Effect. And he goes back and he actually changes statistics are done and how you can actually think about predictive analytics, et cetera, and it bubbles it all down to this quote unquote little DO operator, the do operator. And this is the difference. You have a actively participating audience. It's not about the eyeballs. It's about engagement, and that's why I think what sometimes it gets a little hard to talk about this stuff, and it gets unwieldy because this is going to cross everything. This is how we work, how we play, how we create stories, which is how we actually are able to, even conceive of ourselves and convey our humanity to other people is through stories. And all of this stuff is shifting from a passive model to an active model. And if you don't have real time systems which can respond to people in literally real time or even before real time in many ways, you will not have something that's engaging. It's the gamification of absolutely all of our society.
Oh, I absolutely agree with you, Anne, that that is where we're heading, and that is where the successful marketers utilizing this blockchain NFT technologies are going to go. But I guess what I've seen is a lot of early implementations of this among marketers that are really pretty ham fisted and don't really tick that interactivity box as well as they should.
Yeah. So Nathan had a question.
I
Hi,
do. Thanks so
Nathan.
much for letting me come up. This has been a really interesting room. Christian and Anne and Jeanette, you guys have some very interesting takes. So I have some clients that are coming to me, interested obviously in getting into the space. Started out from, in an academic pursuit, and then slowly started getting involved in more and more projects. And I currently have a couple of NFT projects that I'm consulting on. But I think it was Ann, you that you mentioned that the process is the game, or it's that sort of it's that thing that ingratiates fans to the artist, or whatever you what have you there. I'm just kind of wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on that, because that seems to be when a big brand comes to me. That is the part that I need to get more educated on. That seems to, I mean, that's the part that resonates. That's the thing that seems to be the secret sauce of these little tiny NFT drops, seem to have down. But if I'm trying to cross the gap or the chasm between an artist, a single producer, a music artist or whatever, into corporate, there's a lot of miles that need to be covered there in terms of that engagement. Can you speak to what that process looks like in terms of, is it part of the creation process, the NFT creation process, or what is that you think speaks to the?
Well, I mean, you just said the problem with it right there. Speak to an audience. And I actually gave a talk a number of years ago, maybe 2013. Well, it goes back further, and I can give you an example. I created the world's first ever musician hosted chat to promote the product that we had done with David Bowie. And even he didn't get it back in those days, okay? I won't go down that rabbit hole, but the point is, I saw the future of disintermediation, and it was about handing the microphone to the fan. So I had this little character through the 90s called Mike the Fan. And now, and when we look at it today, it's not about speaking to an audience. The best corporations will be the ones that can actually listen at scale. And this is a weird thing for somebody who's a privacy advocate. Suddenly I went, oh, yeah, so does surveillance systems, right? But it is about a continual relationship and ongoing dialogue. And to do that, at scale is very difficult because it's very hard to be authentic, right? Like nobody wants to have the bot solution of a corporation talking to them, right? It's really about a human to human connection, and elevating your community, not your customer. It's I would think about it as community, not customer.
Yeah, and it's so interesting. I think in every discussion that I had in the last year with an OTT, like over the top company, television company, like a Netflix, but advertising supported, and we talked to blockchain investors, or we talked to all the large brands, and everyone always says to me, "What do you mean get the community together first and then bring programming to them?" This is like a question I get over and over again. I mean, if you think of Netflix and if you think of Amazon, you're sitting there and they send you some sort of a menu with things that you really don't want to watch. You are disconnected from everyone and from everything. Nobody's asking you what they're producing. Nobody's asking you whether you like it or you don't like it. Literally, the way that our business developed, digital media in entertainment in general, it went in the opposite direction of engaging you as a viewer or creating a team member out of you, like some of these blockchain protocols have. So we've gone like away from where we have to go versus in the right direction. So when you think about what the brands have to do with their customers, they also have to do the same thing. They have to find the community that's going to get engaged with that project, like some of these clubhouse communities have done with NFTs. And then that community becomes the de facto builder of your future community and grows the project and is participating in it, investing in it, making money from it, etc. And so brands really don't have that.
They don't have it because they want to hoard the money. And the reason is, so you have to, in addition to everything else you just said right there, you have to incentivize people. Like I can tell you that the generation of millennials and Gen Z that I know, people I'm around all the time, live with, and also, am friends with tons of young people, they want to make money here. Their entertainment is about making money. And I think that is, incredibly exciting. It For me personally, it's gratifying because I started to channel this stuff pretty early, so early, in fact, that it was very hard for me to raise. money. And now I'm looking at it going, wow, I'm involved in the DAO, and I keep thinking I just want to lean hard into it, and or create my own DAO. And of course, we've got regulatory issues. So, I literally agreed to join this panel because that's what I want to learn about is the regulation stuff that's around DAOs right now. So I'd love to get in.
You should be there. Yes, on Tuesday we were doing a primer on Dow. Jeanette was
I
doing it
wanted,
with Adrian, and
I
actually,
wanted to so badly. I just couldn't.
so Wyoming actually has the regulation, and it is somewhat protective, like an LLC in the U.S. at the moment. So that's kind of the place to start to
But
create it.
people, I'm hearing negative things about that though, honestly. Friends with Benefits just did a Delaware C Corp because they could not do what they wanted to do using the Wyoming.
Yeah, it's definitely kind of step by step process. None of it has been litigated yet, right? So you don't really know which direction it's going to go. It is somewhat protective of the found of the team that's actually voting on where this is going.
And I'm dying to ask you a question because, of what you just said and the people you've been hanging out with. Are you getting the sense that the notion of status is changing with the younger generations, like what it means to have status?
They don't care about social media. I'm an anti-influencer, which is why I've got this name anonymous, right? I leaned into it because of my love of privacy and freedom and not wanting to, you know, and the ridiculous thing is, the more I preach that, the more popular I get, right? But yeah, if you're asking, I think that status is really about not being controlled by systems, and also a very very sharp rejection of social.
And I suspect that's in the right direction anyway. We would hope them to reject what's happened to them with social media. Um, in terms of revenue generation, I would say that a lot of the projects that we're seeing are basically driven by creation of these members of an ecosystem, of an economy, of a community that are not just earning money like the Airbnbs of the world, but also investing in that economy and reaping the benefits of the economy doing better. So I'm seeing that happening with new projects.
Can you elaborate?
So if you think of Airbnb or Uber as basically allowing, Mariana to use her home and rent it out and earn revenue from something that she owns, or participating in some of these gig economy plays where I can actually earn money by consulting or advising, or I'm not a technologist, by building technology, etc. That was very much still, you participate in an economy to earn revenue. But with blockchain protocols, the actual tokenization of it all and the fact that you own these tokens allows you to also participate as an investor. Even before the staking protocols, you're basically an investor in this economy, and that is many more times more attractive to an economy participant because they feel like they're building the economy.
It's interesting, like when we talk about the market and fundamentals, and I remember when the whole GameStop thing was going down, unlike most of my peers, I was cheering them on because, I mean, frankly, as a mother, and an aunt, every gift that I ever bought anyone for like the duration of raising my son, and my nieces and nephews was a game card at GameStop. That brand equity with this generation is amazing. And so I wouldn't, when all of this stuff was going down, was sort of the olds versus the news. I was over on the news side because you just can't, there's so much affection for that brand. They could almost do anything, and they're going to have an army, a legion of followers come up behind them,
So it
just
wasn't
for
a meme,
sentimental reasons, for
but it
sentimental reasons.
but it wasn't a meme. perceive themselves to be members of the economy. I hear you. I think so as well. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, that's just belittling it by calling it a meme stock is a meme stock is a mistake. It's just a mistake.
It's another misconception of the journalism in this space. Alexandra, how are you? We're actually
Hi, I'm
about to.
here. It's good to see you.
Good to see you.
Um, Been a long day, but I'm
Yes.
sorry I missed so much of this, but hopefully
Yeah,
I can
we're
catch some of
actually about to wrap it up. Maybe I'll just, maybe you want to give us a couple of thoughts about, what are your most biggest concerns today, maybe with regards to NFTs and the whole space of the Axie Infinity, and we can wrap it up. How's that?
Sure. I mean, so with gaming and stuff like that, I mean, I think that the P2E is a huge space that is only going to grow. And I think it's really going to change the dynamic of how developers get paid, honestly, because right now it's run by these development houses like the publishers, and then they kind of dictate what gets played and what people pay for. And I think right now this paradigm is shifting. Um, Developers are not going to do this stuff for free, right? They're still going to need to get paid for development, but publishers are the ones who are going to be the losers in this kind of economy, right? So if as play to earn develops, it's not that developers are going to be needed less, and it's not that people are going to play fewer games; they'll play more. But I think that the dynamic is going to change, and they'll start using NFT libraries to do either user generated games or developer generated games. Developers could be users too, and then that strategy of either revenue sharing or PDE is probably going to develop continuously. Now, I do worry that it is going to prevent people from doing truly creative games that require a huge amount of time and storyline and stuff like that. um, in order to, like, you have to pay for that kind of stuff because making it is expensive. It's like making a film. So I think I'm a little concerned that if everything tends to go this way, we'll lose these great storylines and beautiful artistry that you see. I mean, honestly, some of the best artists in the industry are gaming artists because they'll pay. But that's what they do now. They don't want to do film animation, then what they do is gaming animation, and some of that stuff has actually been exhibited in galleries. So it's really beautiful, but it's not cheap.
Well,
And
but they can be compensated by being a part of a DAO. That gets pretty interesting. I'm seeing that
well,
happen.
yeah, I mean, this structure will change. So I think, like I said, I think the publishers are the ones that are going to lose out. I think devs are going to end up creating their own sort of organizational structures that are more based on revenue sharing than anything else. And that that can be very flexible. Like I'm working as a dev on this one, but I'm going to do some of the artwork on that one, and there's going to be a lot of crossover. And then the best people in each area are going to be the most in demand for a bunch of games that they'll be able to work on. They'll be able to have a stronger hand in, right? So I see this as being good for players, and good for the developers. And as long as they can maintain the focus on story that publishers forced in, more than devs worry more about playing, about the game logic and stuff. They just tend to, not that they don't worry about story, but they tend to focus more on things like game logic and consistency, and then making sure that whatever needs to happen does happen, getting the bugs picked out of the system. But as long as they consider that storyline is a huge draw, which we can start seeing as we see some of the NFT drops that have a roadmap that includes something that's story based. That makes me very optimistic that people who are creating some of these things are actually including the elements that a publisher would consider as all necessary elements for a game to be produced. So I think that these NFT based games, which could include avatars, which could include like NFT based, like traps or device, like whatever you design that's really really good, you can put it in any type of game as long as it's modified for game logic. So we'll have game logic libraries. And I think that that's going to be a huge driver in the future. And that's going to mean that people who are really good at developing games, at developing strategy for games, at creating new ways for people to try and do something, they're going to be compensated. That is now a skill set. That's not a skill set that was compensated before, but this will allow these people who have this idea of how to make things funner, are going to be compensated for that ability to add enjoyment to a simple strategy, which is not a skill that people value in straight revenue based economies. Like, traditional businesses don't really value that make things funner. They value make things more addictive, but they don't value that one particular segment that consumers really, really respond to, because it's too elusive for them to use a metric for. And that's one of those things that I think if you have it, you have it, and you're going to be fielding offers left and right, and taking a
In
bath in cash and throwing that cash away, getting a new bath of cash because that cash was dirty. So you get another batch of cash and you take another bath in that, and then you're like, oh, well, this cash is used. I'm going to throw that away. So you're going to be like living like Scrooge McDuck.
so you're talking about the economy of delight, Alexandra.
Exactly. That is really what the creative economy is about, isn't it? It's not necessarily delight, it's the economy of emotion,
Mm.
right? That's what creatives tend to do more than anything else. They connect a thing to some strong emotional context, either good or bad, like horror or whatever, but they connect something to something that is emotionally sticky. And
It's
I
not
think
a
that that's a skill set that we just don't have. We don't really value that enough.
I don't think it's enough just to entertain anymore. However, I will say that in 1993, I gave a talk at American Film Institute (AFI), and I said the future of storytelling is a gaming will be on built on a gaming engine, and we're here now. Absolutely, no problem. But the point is how is that going to work with DeFi and blockchains, and uh, uh, decentralized autonomous organizations, whether run by a machine or membership? I mean, I think there someone has to cleave those two and really make them distinct so that we can talk about them separately and not just cobble them together under the DAO moniker. But I don't think it's enough just to entertain people. And I've been saying for years and years and years that that mark my words, people will pay the audience. And in fact, we saw this with Comcast, Universal, NBC, and Comcast. Maybe 5 or 7 years ago, they started experimenting with paying the audience. And but that is it. You have to have that element as well, because at least from what I can see, that generation will not engage in these games unless they're also being compensated. Unless they definitely have a gambler kind of mindset, and they are placing their bets with their time, and they expect to have big payouts.
And I agree with both of you. I think it's creativity and compensation hand in hand. Like if you look at what happened with loot, the whole concept of loot was killing games and killing creativity in the role playing games realm. For 10 years, in its existence, it kind of started to, encumber the gameplay. But then somebody says, okay, let's turn this around and let's get this engaged audience that can get paid by holding these NFT, basically lists of things. And then all of a sudden the creativity took over, so it was a combination that they can earn revenue on their loot, that they own, and that they can actually be creative. That created, I think, the next generation, the next wave of these games, which will be fascinating to watch.
If anybody wants to see, there's a really good there's a documentary that covers some of the very early forays into this from the World of Warcraft side. It's called Play Money. And Play Money was, this idea of being able to monetize the objects within inside gaming world, and frankly using, content farms and people in China to actually game these systems. It's called Play Money. I'm sure you can find it online. But it shows how far back we're going in terms of the seeds of where we are today.
Well, this is really fascinating discussion. I'm sorry that we ran out of time today. We usually try to end this right at 2:30, but then Alexander showed up and got us going in the right direction. And it's been a fascinating panel today. I'm sorry that we can't get to all the questions. We will continue to discuss these concepts next week. You can join us in our Tuesday session, which is a ask any question, very basic questions explaining these concepts and how you can participate in the space. It's at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time on Tuesdays, and then next week 1:30 here. We will also have panelists from our virtual Infiom Salon, which is on Zoom, and they will also do Q&A as well as our invited speakers that are already here today. So we will see all of you next week.
Thank
Thanks,
you so
Marietta.
much.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you, everyone. Awesome discussion.
See you
See you
next week.
next week. Bye bye.